Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Liam's Hockey. It is April the 7th and it is Tuesday. I know what day of the week it is tonight. A little shaky there last night. Some of the days are just running together and it's hard to stay on track of exactly what day of the week it is. But it is Tuesday tonight. It's April 7th and as usual, we've got a few stories to roll out for you. I want to thank my buddy Dale for sending me. I'm gonna stand up here, show you this Scuttle Puck Hockey Podcast. Man, they've been doing these since 2014. They're in and around 300 podcasts. I've been on it. You can Google it and look it up. And Dale, thanks very much. He sent me this shirt and another one that I'll wear at another time, and I really like it. It's really nice. And Dale, thanks. I was very considerate of you, and very happy to put this on. Can't really get it in the frame. Sorry. if I was bigger, maybe nothing I can do. But anyway, thank you very much, pal. And a few stories for you, and then a special toast again tonight. Some news just breaking out of Toronto. We'll touch on that in just a moment, and offer up some good luck and hopefully for a current NHLer. So you may already be aware of that. Touch on that in just a second. So tonight's theme is goaltending, because on this date in 1928, Lester Patrick, the coach and general manager of the New York Rangers, this was the famous moment when he put on the pads at 44 years of age and went in net to replace his injured goaltender Lorne Chabot, and backstopped his team, the New York Rangers, to a playoff win in the Stanley Cup Finals. Game 2 of the Finals against the Montreal Maroons. Now, I believe as the story goes, he allowed the first shot he faced. I think it was by Nell Stewart, which was Old Poison. We just talked about him recently. I think I may have talked about him on Sticks and Taps, actually. Maybe not on Liam's Hockey here. But regardless, I think he allowed the first shot. Didn't allow another goal. And the Rangers won in overtime on a goal scored by Frank Boucher, Ottawa native, one of the 4 Boucher brothers that played in the NHL. And I believe the time of the goal is a 7:05 mark, I think, in 1928. Lester Patrick. Now, a couple things about that. That was not the first time Lester did this. He did it 3 years earlier in 1925 out west in the PCHA, PCHL. I think it was Victoria, I think he may have done it for. So it's not the first time. But when Lorne Chabot got hurt, I think Joe Miller was in the crowd, as the story goes. It's kind of funny because it ties into David Ayres with Carolina and the Zamboni driver who beat Toronto and all the rest of that, as we know. But in this particular case, Lester wanted to use Mr. Miller, and I think it was Joe Miller, and Montreal Maroons wouldn't allow it. And somebody said, "Lester, why don't you play?" And he said, "By God, I will." And he put the pads on and he went in net, kicked out everything other than the first shot, and they won the game, and he was 44. Now, if you remember yesterday, I touched on Johnny Bauer being 44 years, 9 months, and 28 days old. He broke Lester Patrick's record. That's the record he broke for being the oldest goaltender to play in a playoff game, 1928 to 1969. So, kind of significant in that sense. Lester Patrick, Hall of Famer. We all know the innovations, him and his brother Frank. Incredible lineage in hockey, and it's pretty special. So that's a neat one. That is something significant on this day that'll never, ever be taken away for sure and should always be remembered. On this date in 1974, and we've touched on this man before already too in these little This Days in Hockey or Liam's Hockey that we've been doing. Andy Brown, the last goaltender to play in the NHL without a mask. So I talked about him when I did the Gordie Howe tribute on Gordie's birthday, what would have been his 92nd birthday, on March the 31st. Andy Brown was the last goaltender in the NHL to not wear a mask and play, obviously. This was the final game that he played in the NHL, April 7th, 1974. And he went to the WHA, where he continued not to wear a mask. But on this date, he played in the NHL for the Pittsburgh Penguins against the Atlanta Flames, and they lost 7-4. 6-3. They lost 6-3. And scoring the last goal ever on a maskless goaltender who played the whole game without a mask was Ray Comeau. Ray Comeau, the Atlanta Flames, scored the final goal ever. Ray Comeau, a name probably most of you aren't aware of, played over 500 games in the NHL. He was Montreal property. He was in the minors and won the Calder Cup on that Nova Scotia team in 71-72 that Larry Robinson was on and Noel Price was on and Al McNeil coached. First Canadian team to win the Calder Cup. in the American Hockey League in 1972. Ray Comeau actually had a hell of a playoff for them that year. I believe he had 20 points in 15 or 16 playoff games. Outstanding playoff. That got him a call up to the big boys with the Habs. They were defending Cup champs. He couldn't make them. They moved him. He ended up in Atlanta, later Colorado with the Rockies, and over 500 games. He scored the final goal ever on Andy Brown in the NHL. Now, one other thing about that. Andy Brown got a penalty that game and ended up with 60 minutes in penalties that season as a goaltender in 36 games. That was an NHL record. And it stayed a record for 6 years until Jerry Cheevers broke it in 1980 with 62 minutes, which stayed a record until Ronnie Hextall came to the league. And it was over. Ronnie Hextall had 2 seasons of over 100 penalty minutes as a goaltender. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, Tom Barrasso had a pretty rough year as well there. In 1989, I think he picked up about 70 minutes in penalties. And Cheesy was in at 62. Andy Brown still sits like... Eddie Belfour had a year up there as well. Nobody beat Hextall. But Andy Brown set the record on this night in 74 with 60 minutes in penalties and the last goalie to play without a mask in the NHL. I think that's pretty significant. Which brings me to my sidebar story. I'm stepping away from the date, but I got to do it because it's somewhat goaltender related. So I said, oh, what the hell? It's part of the theme tonight. So I'm going with it. So back in the day, in the Lester Patrick days, as we just talked about, 1928, and even if you back it up a few years before that, the NHL started in 1917-18. So if a goaltender got a penalty, he had to serve it. You had to go in the box. It's crazy, I know, right? Some of the rules. So on February 1st, 1922, the Montreal Canadiens were playing the Ottawa Senators. It's funny, eh? The more things change. But anyway, Sprague Cleghorn and his brother Ogie, get the names right, were playing for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, the year before, the Ottawa Senators won the Stanley Cup. They were 2-time defending Cup champs. They won in 20 and 21. They were the powerhouse of the league. And when you won the NHL in those days and traveled to play the other leagues, you could pick up players. And they picked up Sprague Cleghorn. But before they went to the Stanley Cup Finals, they gassed him. They said, no, we don't need you. We don't need you. And he was pissed. He knew they were defending Stanley Cup champions. He wanted another shot, more money, prize money, the whole 9 yards. And he was pissed. He picked this night, February 1st, 1922, to exact his revenge. And him and his brother Ogie went out there with a plain mission to put as many Ottawa Senators in the hospital as they could. Here's where it relates to goaltending. The Canadian goaltender was the legendary George Vezina. Yes, the man who the trophy is named after. He got a penalty, had to serve it. Sprague Cleghorn went in net for him. Now, you didn't put the pads on and all the rest. You just stood in net. It's crazy when you think about it. So he went in net, and Ottawa's coming down, and at that moment, whatever, the tumblers are in his head turned over, and he just said, now's the time. Remember, he's playing as the goaltender. So here's what he did. I'm going to read it to you, okay? So bear with me here. Real fireworks broke out when the Canadiens visited Ottawa on February 1st. Sprague Cleghorn had declared a vendetta against the Senators for dropping him after the Stanley Cup Series of the previous year. In this game, he made a shambles of the Ottawa team with some assistance from his brother Ogie. He came out of the net while serving a penalty for George Vezina, and he attacked Eddie Girard. He took a vicious swing at him and cut him over the eye for 5 stitches. He then went and charged and hit Frank Niber, sending him ass over tea kettle, either breaking or dislocating Niber's elbow. He then turned towards Cy Dennedy and butt-ended him in the eye, cutting him badly, and then cross-checked him in the face, breaking his nose. I shouldn't be laughing, but it's 98 years ago. He got a $15 fine and a match penalty, which was 20 minutes in those days. The Ottawa police offered to arrest Cleghorn after the game for assault. Referee Lou Marsh. So this is the top trophy in Canada for our top athletes, wins the Lou Marsh Award. This is the guy. He was refereeing the game. Lou said in his report after the game he considered the 2 Cleghorns a disgrace to the game. The Ottawa club formally requested Cleghorn's expulsion from the league. Believe me, folks, he was absolutely nuts. When I interviewed King Clancy in Maple Leaf Gardens in 1983. The second name I mentioned to him was Eddie Shore. The first name I mentioned to him was Sprague Cleghorn. He turned as white as whatever is white in behind me here. Like, he just could not believe I knew the name. And his description of Sprague Cleghorn was murderous. That's what he called him. He said he was murderous. And like he was absolutely flat out psychotic. I got some other great stories about him. I'll save them for another time. I just think that's anyway. It deviates from the day, but it had a goaltending connotation. So Cleghorn picked up 29 minutes in penalties after charging out of the net. He's supposed to be the goaltender. It's just too much. Anyway, that's it for tonight. Short and sweet. I was gonna do a draft lottery thing, but the hell with it. I just feel like drinking whiskey. I tell you, I'm getting cooped up. I feel an explosion coming. It's not good. But anyway, I'm going to pour a healthy shot here. I'll tell you what, because you may have already heard this. Colby Cave of the Edmonton Oilers was admitted to hospital last night, I believe, in Toronto, unrelated to COVID. He played some with the Oilers this year, and he played in their farm team, I think, in Bakersfield. Nice hockey player. He's got some bleeding on the brain. So hopefully, I just heard this, hopefully he's going to be okay. And I'm going to toast that hopefully he has good health going forward from this situation. All right? Be well. G'day.